No, Taylor Swift is not destroying the legacy of Ophelia in the song The Fate of Ophelia. And honestly, the takes that I am seeing from people who are saying that Taylor doesn't understand Ophelia, a lot of them are missing nuance and are giving anti-intellectualism. So let's get into it. Let's start with my credentials as a person giving information about this. First of all, I am a huge Shakespeare fan. I am going to be avoiding saying the word Shakespeare because actually that is my dog's name and she's currently sleeping, which she's usually very annoying while I'm trying to film videos. So we're going to say Willie Shakes instead. So Willie Shakes, I love that man. Obviously, I named my dog after him. Her name was Spears when I adopted her, and, easy change. I'm also an author. I wrote a YA Sapphic Hamlet retelling that came out about a year ago called Daisy Plucked, where Ophelia is the main character because she's one of my favorite literary characters of all time. I also have a master's in English, and I took a bunch of Shakespeare classes throughout my undergrad and graduate career, and even in high school I took a Shakespeare class because I love Willie Shakes. And in terms of Taylor Swift, I am a huge Swiftie. I've been a fan since debut. I didn't get to see her in concert till the Eras Tour, but I did see her at the Eras Tour. I was up in the nosebleeds, but you know what? I was there. And my tickets were only like $125, but it is what it is. I used to have a Taylor Swift podcast with my best friend called Swift Lore for the last 2 years, where we would dive into the lyrics and lore of our Lord and Savior, Dr. Taylor Allison Swift. That was our little tagline. Ended recently, and now I'm making you listen to me talk about Taylor Swift. But also, you're here of your own volition, so that's on you. But the goal of this video is to show that it's valid to think that Taylor Swift didn't interpret Ophelia in a way that aligns with your interpretation and your view of the character. However, saying that Taylor 100% didn't get it, misinterpreted it, again, it's giving anti-intellectualism, because the thing about Willie Shakes' work is that the reason they've lasted so long and still are so prevalent 500 years after he wrote them is because they are so up to interpretation, and there are so many different ways to stage a Shakespeare play, and there are so many different ways to interpret the characters and their relationships and their dynamics, and that nuance and that ability to tailor the story to the narrative that you want to tell as a director or producer or actor is what has made his works so long lasting. So if you see anyone talking about The Fate of Ophelia and they are saying, this is what Willie Shakes meant, this is exactly what he was saying here, they're probably not qualified to be talking about good old Willie Shakes, because even I took a lot of classes about this, I've studied a lot, there are so many different interpretations, and the key to studying his work is being able to find these different interpretations and finding evidence to support them. So one more bit of context is that in the time of Willie Shakes, there weren't like stage directions. That's why if you read a Shakespeare play, anytime there's stage directions, they're in italics and sometimes also in brackets, because that's things that the editors have chosen to put in there. A lot of times it's kind of the popularized idea of where like a character exits or something like that. We have very little information about the original staging of these plays. We have very little information about how they were performed. What we have is the words, and that's kind of it. And the words are nuanced. And again, that's why it's so long lasting. And that's why in the year 2025, 500 years after this play was originally put out into the world and performed for the first time, we have the biggest pop artist in the world using the story of Ophelia and the fate of Ophelia and that tragedy as a character foil to her own journey and her own love story in her own life. So let's get into it. When I was doing research for this video, I wanted to look up kind of what exactly people were saying who thought that this song wasn't good or wasn't in line with what good old Willie Shakes intended for his character to be. And I found this Reddit post that kind of covered a lot of these themes and a lot of things that I was seeing in other posts. So I'm going to be using this, but this is no hate to this user. I see where they're coming from with a lot of their points, but it's a Reddit post. So let's get into it. From r/majestic_employer_42 on Reddit. Ophelia in the original play showcases the life women had in that time period. She didn't have any agency or her own beliefs because she was sheltered and controlled by the men in her life. Her whole life is revolved around her relationships with her father, brother, and lover. Shakespeare intentionally wrote all the conversations Ophelia had with these men to be in an infantilizing or sexualizing manner to show that she was never considered an equal in their eyes and the oppressive nature women faced. She was considered a chess piece for the men in their game of court politics and was meant to entirely obey them. In the play, she's driven to madness after Hamlet rejects her and kills her father. She then commits suicide. Taylor seems to interpret this as a one-sided tragic love story where Ophelia dies heartbroken because of the rejection and betrayal from her loved one. Hence, by finding someone who loves her wholeheartedly and is committed to her, saves her from the fate of Ophelia where she might have drowned in sadness due to the failure of her past relationships. In the play, however, Ophelia's suicide represents her first true decision made on her own. It's about reclaiming of her personal agency. The tragic nature of Ophelia's death stems from the fact that outside forces were fully responsible for her suffering and she was powerless and voiceless to resist them. Even in death, her fate is reinterpreted by other people. Ophelia's suffering would have continued even if Hamlet or another guy married her, because her true escape wasn't finding love, it was having her own autonomy and agency. So, there are things in this take that I agree with, like Ophelia being used as a pawn by the men in her life, but I have some notes, to put it lightly. So the first thing that I want to address is Ophelia's fate, and this idea of what is the fate of Ophelia? Ophelia is the second major death in this tragedy. Third if you count Hamlet Sr., but he dies before the plays start, so I don't really count him. It's her father, and then her, and then it's a domino effect. Spoiler for Hamlet, most people die. That's kind of how tragedies written by Willie Shakes go. And the men in her life are very controlling. They don't respect her. They don't see her as her own person. They see her as an extension of themselves as opposed to her own freestanding person with desire and thought and agency and will. And they disrespect her. They deceive her. They control every aspect of her life. But there's more to that. There's more to her fate than just the way that the men treated her. To me, the fate of Ophelia is not only having these men that are trying to control her and disrespect her and take away any sense of agency or personal beliefs that she has, it's also the fact that she loves these men that treat her terribly, that, tell her everything to do. She's in love with the prince, and her dad tells her, not a good idea, you have to stop seeing him, and also you're going to return his letters. And then Hamlet starts being crazy towards her. The first time that we hear Hamlet acting out of character and crazy in the play, he went to Ophelia's sewing chamber and was wearing soiled clothes, and he didn't have his stockings up, and he just walked in and held her wrist and just looked at her, and then he left. Very unsettling. That's how he hard launched his craziness, because his plan to figure out if his uncle killed his dad or not was to act really crazy so that he could get away with saying more, so that he could kind of get reactions. I don't know, it's not a very well thought out plan. It doesn't work out for him. Wouldn't recommend. And so it's not only that her fate is not just people treating her badly, it's her loving these people that treat her badly. That's the real tragedy, is that Ophelia loves Hamlet, she loves her father, she loves her brother, she loves the king and queen, and none of them really care about her. And so if we look at that as the fate of Ophelia, we see how Taylor can relate to that, because look at a song like The Prophecy. I mean, first of all, banger. Second of all, The Prophecy showed that she thought that she's kind of like doomed to this life of loving people who don't treat her well. And the fate of Ophelia is kind of the follow-up to that, saying, actually, I had someone that came into my life and showed me respect and hyped me up and was there for me and loves me loudly in a way that she hadn't experienced before. And that's what disrupted her from going down this tragic path, is that now, even if they broke up, she's saved from the fate of Ophelia because she knows now how she deserves to be loved. She knows what it feels like to have someone that is there supporting you and loving you and not trying to make you smaller or not trying to control you. And that's how she was saved from the fate of Ophelia, in my opinion. But let's talk about some of the other claims that are made in this post. First of all, saying that Ophelia in the original play showcases the life women had in that time period, oversimplification city. Because Ophelia represents upper class, unmarried, noble woman in supposedly Denmark, but realistically probably more reflective of England, as good old Willie Shakes never actually left England in his life, which is a source of hot debate for the people who think that Willie Shakes was actually somebody else under a pseudonym. But, so she represented just that little subset of how women were in that time. We even see in the play itself, the other main female character, Gertrude, is married, she's a queen twice over, she's the mother of a prince, and she has a lot more agency and control and respect from the people around her, from the men in her life, than Ophelia does. So yes, Ophelia is representative of some of the women's experience during that time, but definitely not all women. Also, like a peasant or a maid or something like that would not have the same control and ideals placed on her. Nuance. So again, to say that Ophelia is representative of all women, not right. The next thing that I want to say, Shakespeare intentionally wrote all the conversations Ophelia had with these men to be infantilizing or sexualizing manner, so she was never considered an equal in their eyes in the oppressive nature women faced. I'm sorry, how do you know what his intentions were? Anytime that you hear someone saying this is what they meant and they don't have a direct source to back it up, like, we don't have any quotes of good old Willie Shakes talking about what he meant when he made his character say things. So you don't know. A lot of the conversations infantilizing her or sexualizing her, yes, that's true. But to say that that's 100% what Shakespeare's intention was, let's take a step back. You don't know what he was thinking. You don't know the man. I don't know the man. I don't know what he was thinking. I can only have theories and support it with textual evidence. So to say that, like, that's 100% his intention, I also do think that her conversation with her brother is probably the only moment where it's not that she's equal to him, because he is still giving her advice, but I wouldn't say that he's infantilizing her in that scene. He's treating her a little bit more like an equal. I'm not saying that he's perfect. He is still a man and Ophelia is still being oppressed, but it's to say that every conversation, also say that it's only the men. Even Gertrude doesn't want to be around Ophelia. When she goes crazy, Ophelia's like, I want to see the queen, and servants come and are like, hey, Ophelia wants to see you, and the queen's like, I don't want to see her. I don't want to deal with that. I just watched her dad get murdered. I don't want to see her. And only sees her because they kind of are like, she's really not doing well and she really wants to see you. Can she please come in? She's crazy. Which is its own whole thing. Hello, my camera died, so if the lighting or angle has changed, that's why. But what I want to talk about next is labeling Ophelia's death as 100% a purposeful suicide. How we find out that Ophelia has died, because obviously she did not drown on stage. It was the early 1500s. They did not have the means for that level of production yet. Although now if you watch modern interpretations, mainly film adaptations, they will include the scene of Ophelia dying, and that kind of reinforces what their take on her death is, because here is what we actually hear. I'm not going to read what Gertrude says, but essentially what happens is Laertes and Claudius are plotting about Hamlet because they just found out that he's coming back from England. Queen doesn't know yet, I believe, and they're plotting about how they're going to make sure that he dies because they want him dead. He did kill Laertes' dad, and also he's about to catch Claudius as the murderer of his father, which would kind of fuck up Claudius's whole thing as being the king. So they're having that discussion. Gertrude comes in, she's the queen. She comes in and she says, Ophelia is dead, she drowned. And they're like, what happened? And then she gives a very detailed description of what happened to Ophelia. She says Ophelia was making garlands, like flower crowns and things out of flowers and branches, and she climbed up in a willow tree to reach for something, and then she fell into this river, and then she's laying in the river and she was just singing while her dress, like before it had been saturated with water, and she's just floating, she was singing, and then once it got saturated with water, it pulled her under and she drowned. And says as she's floating, she chanted snatches of old lauds as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. So essentially this is saying that she was sitting there singing as if A, she did not know the danger that she was under, or as if she was some sort of water creature. So I think one of the first Shakespeare classes I took was when I was in high school, and that was the first time I read Hamlet. And I distinctly remember my teacher bringing up one of the theories about Ophelia's death is that the Queen Gertrude actually witnessed Ophelia dying and did nothing to help. And his theory behind it, which is also a theory spoken about by other Shakespeare scholars, is that Ophelia was pregnant, and that's why Gertrude let her die, because she's like, oh, Ophelia's crazy, Hamlet's crazy and banished, and if Ophelia gives birth, he'll be out of wedlock, so she'll be just disgraced, the child will be a bastard, and as my family likes to say, that kid would be fab, fucked at birth. And so Gertrude saw her moment of opportunity and let her drown because she knew that Ophelia was not conscious enough of her own actions to realize that she was in danger. Now, the other option with like following that same theme is that Gertrude knew that Ophelia was pregnant and she pushed her in the river and then lied about what happened because, she didn't want to confess murder to the victim's older brother, which fair. And the reason why people think Ophelia might be pregnant is because of something that she says in her final scene where she is living, where she's handing out all these different flowers, which I do have all of the flowers tattooed on me. I cannot pull this dress up enough to show, but I will insert a picture of my Ophelia bouquet tattoo sleeve. It's how I started. This is my Shakespeare Taylor Swift sleeve. I might make a video talking about all of it at some point, but just know that it exists. I can't believe I didn't mention that when I was talking about my credentials for this video. Anyways, so in Ophelia's speech where she's handing out flowers, a lot of productions will either have her handing out nothing, or she will be handing out like weeds or something, just something that's not actually the flowers, or just other flowers that aren't the right ones that she's listing. One of the flowers, rue, was used as a abortion aid, to induce miscarriages during this time. So her mentioning that could have been a hint that she was pregnant and that her and Hamlet had premarital sex. It's possible. And because it's possible, that means it might be why Gertrude let her die. The other thing is Gertrude has a lot of detail about how Ophelia died, which implies that either she watched it or maybe a servant watched it and then relayed what happened to her. But either way, Ophelia was not helped. And to say that her death is a moment of agency and that it's a purposeful suicide it's one interpretation, but it's definitely something that you could argue against, because the last scene that Ophelia is in when she's alive, she is not in her right mind. She's gone crazy with grief and she doesn't know what she's doing anymore, and she's singing these songs. She sings a dirty suggestive song to the King of Denmark, which is not something that pre-Polonius's death Ophelia would ever do. And to call it agency when she might not have really been in her right mind, and to say that that's her moment of agency, I don't know if she has any agency in the play, to be honest. So the last thing I want to address from this Reddit post is the idea that Ophelia wouldn't have been able to escape her fate if she had married Hamlet or married some other well-suited man for her. And that's true, because the way that Ophelia would have escaped her fate, it's true, it would have been through having her own autonomy and agency. But realistically, in that time period, to go back to what this person said, married women would have more freedom and more autonomy in some ways. They would still be controlled by their husbands, most likely. But if you look at someone like Gertrude, she is able to speak her mind and she's able to be part of plans, and she is excluded from plans such as the one to, kill her son, which, fair. But she has more power and agency. And so if Ophelia had married someone, it might not have given her total autonomy and agency, but it would have given her some leeway. But in that same vein, I think that in the Taylor Swift song, Taylor saying that she escaped the fate of Ophelia is that she always had the opportunity to have that agency and autonomy over her life, but she wasn't taking it because she didn't think that she had it, because she felt like she was living a predestined tragedy. In the prophecy, she's saying please change the prophecy. And I sound like an infant feeling like the very last drops of an ink pen. Sorry. And the Fate of Ophelia, it's kind of silly. It's a fun little pop song. The dance is fun. I just think that if you're going to say Taylor Swift misunderstood Hamlet, you should not be misunderstanding Hamlet in your interpretation of it, and you should be acknowledging that there are a lot of different ways to interpret a lot of the scenes in the play. And so the next thing that I kind of want to address that people are talking about is this idea that Taylor Swift isn't interpreting Hamlet correctly, which I already talked a lot about interpretations, but this song, The Fate of Ophelia, she's referencing Ophelia and she's referencing that tragedy. And I remember before the album even came out, did I cry when I found out that Taylor Swift was releasing a song called The Fate of Ophelia? Yes. Here's a picture of me crying. To me, that song was kind of the bridge from Tortured Poets Department into The Life of a Showgirl. It's going from this depressing fate of Ophelia, this tragedy, and suddenly being oh wait, I escaped the fate of Ophelia. I'm now on this happy trajectory. That's kind of narratively in the world of Taylor Swift, the Taylor Swift cinematic universe, if you will. That's how I interpret it working. And this song is not a Hamlet retelling, and I don't think that's what she set out to do. And she does have a Shakespeare retelling song. She has Love Story. Famously, she changed the ending to make it a happy, joyful ending, because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to rewrite the tragedy and make it happy. So that the fact that now she has rewritten her own personal tragedy and avoided the fate of this character, that's a very happy, good thing. And oversimplifying it to say well, she's not talking about Ophelia's story. No, she's talking about her own story, and she's using Ophelia as a reference point to talk about how she felt like she was living a tragedy, and now she feels like she's living a fairy tale. And the other thing that I've been seeing pushback about is being in the tower, and people saying Ophelia was never in a tower. A tower is never mentioned in Hamlet. But you know what else is never mentioned in Hamlet? Anything about the setting. If we want to argue, yeah, towers are not really mentioned in Hamlet. I can't say with 100% certainty that they're never mentioned because it might be in passing and I just don't remember. But we also don't know that Ophelia wasn't in a tower. We don't know anything about the staging of these plays. And also, the tower as a concept is about like women being put up on this pedestal to the degree where they're separated from society and they're put on this thing where they can see everything going on but they aren't a part of it. And seeing that as a metaphor for like Taylor feeling like she couldn't do things and then getting in this relationship where she feels like she can come out of her tower and explore the world and experience things for herself. It's a good metaphor. And also, who's to say Ophelia wasn't in a tower? If I wanted to put on a production of Hamlet right now, I could put Ophelia in a tower, and then I'd be like, well, actually, Ophelia was in a tower in my specific production, so you're wrong. So in my theoretical production, Ophelia will be in a tower. There will be a tower on the stage in some way. So let's wrap up this video with my final thoughts. First of all, reinterpreting literature into songs, as Taylor has done many times in Love Story, Tolerate It, Happiness, and The Fate of Ophelia, as well as The Albatross. That's a short story, but still a story. She likes to reinterpret these classic stories and put them in the context of her life. And what's so beautiful about stories is that they give us a peek into the way that other people live, and the way that they think, and the way that they feel, and it builds empathy, and it also is something that we can relate to, and we can find the words to describe how we're feeling by reading somebody else who has already figured out how to say something. And I think that relating to a story and being so inspired by it that you want to take it and insert it into your life and make it part of your own personal narrative is such a beautiful thing. And I think that discouraging Taylor Swift from doing it, it's not going to impact Taylor Swift, but it will impact people who are maybe like up and coming singer-songwriters or, you know, up and coming writers of any sort. I wrote a Shakespeare retelling. Is it 100% faithful adaptation of Hamlet? No. There's lesbians. I made Hamlet a woman because I can. So the idea that we have to be 100% faithful to source materials in retellings it's giving anti-intellectualism. And just because Taylor has written retellings before doesn't mean that every time that she mentions Shakespeare, it's going to be a retelling. I mean, in The Albatross, she quotes Romeo and Juliet as well, A Rose by Any Other Name, and then she says, is a scandal, as opposed to A Rose by Any Other Name Smells as Sweet. And this song as a whole, it's not about Ophelia. It's about the concept of Ophelia as this tragic figure who was destroyed by the men in her life, and feeling like you were going down that path, and then meeting someone who changes your mind and changes your mindset and your outlook on the world and is able to show you that you don't have to be destroyed by love in order to have it, which I think is a big revelation for a lot of women, that you don't have to suffer in a relationship, that you can just be happy. I think women are really conditioned to just accept shitty male behavior because society. And I think in this song, Taylor was using Ophelia almost as a character foil for herself in some ways, of like, yeah, maybe if this was 1500, I would have had the Fate of Ophelia, but now you've saved my heart from the Fate of Ophelia. That's beautiful. My final thing I want to say is kind of a word of warning. Anyone who's taking a nuanced topic in a Shakespeare play, such as a character's overall arc and meaning, and saying that there is only one way to interpret it, and this is the way, and if you disagree, you're stupid, watch out, because black and white thinking is very prevalent on social media, because when you only have 60 seconds to make your point, and you only have about 2 to 3 seconds to get someone's attention and keep it, you're going to say something crazy, and you're not going to mention nuance because you only have 60 seconds, so you're just going to talk about your take. So just remember, anytime that you're seeing somebody talk about a topic as deep and well-researched and hotly debated as most things in Shakespeare plays, if someone says that they have the only correct interpretation, they don't. They kind of discredit themselves by saying that they are the be-all, end-all, this is the right interpretation, because that's the joy of Shakespeare, is that there is no correct interpretation of many of the things. There's just ones that you can choose from. There's more popular interpretations, there's less popular ones, but there's a lot of nuance, and black and white thinking is fucking up the world. So, all of this to say, if you love Hamlet, I am working on a longer video right now that is a deep dive into everything that happens in Hamlet and talking about like these fun little nuanced things. If you want to hear the other things that are up for interpretation in Hamlet, that video will be coming sometime in the next month, probably. We'll see. It's going to be a long one, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. If you didn't enjoy this video, let me know in the comments, but be nice. I'm also working on some other fun series. I want to do a series of like reading different pieces of media, like books, movies, songs, from the perspective of a writer and talking about the writing techniques used and like how you can kind of use that in your own work. So this channel is reading and writing and now analysis because that's what I like to do. So I will see you in the next video, and in the meantime, happy reading, happy listening, and happy writing. Bye!